fantastic. And now we understand why bears play such an important role in our fairy tales. Our last speaker is Alan Moore, an author, a thinker with an elastic mind. I hope he's going to give us a boost, an idea, energy, something to chew on. Alan listened to all the speakers, and perhaps he sees a connection. He promised he would try to see a connection at least, a context, and a line in the variety of speakers. No straight lines. Bij kronke lijnen voelt Alan Moore zich beter thuis. Hij is directeur-oprichter van SMLXL, Small, Medium, Large, Extra Large, een crossmediaal marketingbureau in Cambridge en Londen. In zijn boek No Straight Lines, uit 2010, schetst hij een beeld van een netwerksamenleving die bepalend voor onze toekomst zal zijn. Er staat ons een communicatierevolutie te wachten. Het boek is een inspirerend pleidooi voor een wereld waarin mensen zich meer gezamenlijk inzetten voor een duurzame en een betere maatschappij. We have to change, Alan tells us. We cannot permit ourselves to have organizations, structures, as we started them 100 years ago. We keep saying we have to change, but somehow we do not do it. Saying yes and doing the opposite. No straight line indeed. Alan Moore, help us out.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Nelke, for inviting me to speak. We're just setting up my laptop. I've been humbled by some of the speakers here today, if not all of them. Heartfelt stories, deeply connected to me in many ways, actually, and I'm very jealous of you now with your bears and the bears story. That's, we forget about the majesty of nature and how extraordinary she is. The thing about a quest is, you don't really realize you're on one until you're too far in it. And that's kind of what happened to me, because I would say that I've been on a quest, I've been on an extraordinary journey. And it starts off with me flying about 150 times a year for about 4 or 5 years, working in advertising. I was very successful, made a lot of money, worked with some of the biggest brands. But the problem with flying 150 times a year when I was doing it is that you tend to read a lot. And that's very dangerous, because then you're sitting there thinking about that book and that piece of knowledge and that piece of information. And all of a sudden you start to see a pattern emerge. And it sort of glints to you in the sort of semi-darkness of your brain, and you're thinking, this is really interesting, I need to understand this deeper, there's a connection here. And I suppose, in a way, that's where this idea of non-linearity sort of comes from, to some degree, of the journey that I've been on. Why the motorcycle? Because actually I went everywhere for many, many years if I wasn't on a plane on 2 wheels. And so this is kind of very representative of my very curvy life that I had. I want to share with you some just very sort of top-line thoughts about No Straight Lines, because it is quite a deep dive into our world that we live in. But it starts with the fact that actually we stand, I think, at the adaptive edge of our industrial society. And we're in transition from that industrial world. And that industrial world has a particular way of thinking, has a particular way of behaving. It likes things in nice silo boxes. It doesn't like things joined up. It likes to talk about budgets and silos. And in fact, the way that we run our healthcare systems, the way that we educate our children, the way that we run our economies are totally really run on this industrial logic. And we are, in fact, I think, transitioning to, a non-linear world, a more complex world that has a very different set of rules and a way of being. And I'll just tell you a little story. I've got a friend of mine, and a few years ago, he decided he would bring his kids to Europe for the first time, and they would travel through Europe on a train for about a week or so. So my friend's kids said, you know, Dad, this would be a great opportunity for you to read the Harry Potter stories. And he thought, well, you know what, I'll be a man of the world, I'll be a 21st century dad, I'll buy myself an iPod, I'll put Harry Potter on the iPod, and I'll listen to the stories. So he does that for the week. He's in Europe, and at the end of the holiday, he comes down, speaks to his kids, good morning, and they say, morning, Dad, how are you getting on with Harry Potter? And he says, well, Harry Potter's a bit rubbish, isn't it? Well, in fact, it's a bit shit. And they said, what do you mean, Dad? And he said, well, the character comes all over the place. The character comes and goes. The plot's here and there. I can't understand it. And they said, well, let's have a look at your iPod. So they looked at his iPod, and they looked at each other, and they looked at the dad, and they started to laugh. And they looked at the iPod and each other and the dad, and they laughed some more until the tears are rolling down their face. And my friend is getting really angry. He's saying, kids, what is so funny? And he said, Dad, you've been listening to Harry Potter all week on shuffle. My friend came from a very linear world, okay? I make light of it. But there is an inherent complexity in our non-linear world and a way of thinking about it which has a different type of logic. And so I argue that, in fact, you know, our industrial organizations are inappropriate for the world that we live in. And in fact, I think that if we look at our healthcare systems, I said if we look at our education systems, if we look at the financial collapse that's had such a massive impact on every single person in this room and outside of this room, you understand what I mean. I think we've kind of embraced a form of economics which actually says that numbers are more important than anything else. And in that pursuit of what we call a free market economics, we've kind of lost sight of what makes us as human. And as I said, I think we've become more machine-like than we care to admit. And this has actually done a huge damage for humanity. You know, that's damaged us psychologically. It's damaged us materially. It's damaged us spiritually. It's almost deconstructed humanity to the point, I think, of deconstruction. Now, Adrian said that I would give you a boost, so, you know, I just had to kind of get that in there first to kind of give some context of my journey. People ask me, they say, you know, Alan, are you an optimist? And I say, well, I hope so. Right? Because I think that actually all is not lost. And I think we're in a very interesting time. And it starts with this quote by John Stuart Mill, who said that human nature is not built like a machine and set to do the work that is described to it. But he says we are multifaceted, we are complex. We're actually more like trees, where we identify every tree as a tree, but we understand that every single tree is truly unique when we allow it to become the thing that it naturally should be. And that's where I think something very interesting is happening. I think actually that we are, in fact, having a bit of a sort of systems upgrade. And this systems upgrade is based around what makes us as human beings. And it's upgraded to what I call the human OS, the human operating system. And so you're sitting in the room and saying, well, what does he mean? What does he mean, the operating system? What does it want? Well, I think it wants these things. It wants, we want, I want, you want greater opportunity, greater freedom, greater empowerment. We heard the word mutualism today a number of times. Greater diversity. Look at that extraordinary pictures of nature that we saw. She's there, she's raw, she's real, she's visceral, because actually she allows diversity to flourish in all that happens there. We absolutely want greater efficiency. We want greater independence. And God forbid, we might just want a little bit more beauty in this world. And by that, I don't mean that in 2013 the colour's red and skirts come down to here. I mean about the aesthetics of everything, the aesthetics of design, beautiful design code, beautifully designed buildings. Look at the Henry Ford building that we were looking about. That's a different type of aesthetics. And saying actually healthcare can be beautiful. It can be a wonderful experience. There is a different way of doing things. In my journey, in my short life, what I've understood is that when people have ugly thoughts, only ugly things come out as a consequence of that. Whereas if we strive for things which are more beautiful, then I think we have a better chance of embracing a better type of world. So I think we face a design challenge and a design problem. And when I was writing No Straight Lines, And I was talking to publishers, and they said, well, so what's your book about? And I said, well, it's about the inherent complexity of the world that we're living in. Our industrial world's not really up for the job, and we need to look at it through this sort of social, organizational, and economic lens all at the same time. And then, that's really complicated, isn't it? I'll tell you what, you can write a book on how to do social media. I said, God, my book's got nothing to do with social media. You can write a book on organizational theory. I said, well, it's got a bit of that, but not without the other two. Or you can do a how to do business book with 7 easy rules. And I went, well, therein lies your problem. So I've got a navigational guide that I want to share with you. Because each and every one of you is in a different port. Each and every one of you has a different type of journey. Each and every one of you has a different type of mission and a different type of goal. But what I do see is that we need to help each other navigate from this linear world that we're in to a non-linear world, which I think actually offers us greater opportunity. And the first principle is, in fact, this word ambiguity. And I use it rather than the word complexity, because what I've seen is, for many, many organizations, and I've worked with some over the years, is that when they are faced with real change, real social change, actually that world becomes ambiguous to them. It becomes unclear. It's like a fog. It's like a smokescreen. And that is different to complexity to a degree. So how do you make sense of that? Yes, how do we make sense of a more complex world? And what we see is that linear thinkers want to sort of just take it down a little sort of silo like this. But what we've got to do is we've got to embrace fear of the unknown. We've got to be able to see the world in its kind of more joined up type of way. We've got to see it as a system. We've got to be able to step back and say, rather than looking at this tiny little piece, because that's what a straight line thinker does, you know, we've broken down all the problems to this one thing, you've got to really understand and say, what is it that we're really looking at here? And how do we get sight of that? And actually what I find is that people quite often will become blind to that because they are in fact refusing to embrace something that really scares them. The second one is adaptiveness. How do we learn to become adaptive? Well, we need to evolve and develop a different type of language. This on the screen was my own attempt at thinking about a pattern language around a company that I've written about called Local Motors. They're talking about, well, open source, open APIs, participatory tools, community, participatory media, Creative Commons as a form of legal frameworks, flex manufacturing, 3D printing, co-creation. You know, this is not the language of a normal car company. And they can build cars 5 times faster for 100 times less the capital cost. Because they have a language at their disposal that allows them to describe a completely different type of destination. And of course, it was Wittgenstein who said that the limits of our language are the limits of our world. So that language is really important. If we keep describing these problems with the same language, we're not going to get to new, novel, exciting possibilities and destinations that could be transformative. The third one, is openness. Nature's default setting is open. So there's a whole language around that, which I think is very important for us to understand and embrace. Open innovation, open legal frameworks, open data, open APIs, open organizations, open source. There's a whole range around openness where diversity and mutualism can thrive and flourish, rather than the idea that in our industrial world we worked in monocultures and a mono way of thinking. We see this actually with the rise of new financial systems called crowdfunding. Now, this is very early days, but actually in total, crowdfunding has raised $1.5 billion, and it puts the democratization of financial capital back into people's hands. It's the start of a very long journey. Or, in fact, the idea that MIT actually published their entire curricula online for free under an open commons license. And people said to them, "You're insane. No one's going to turn up at MIT." But in fact, the opposite happened. Through the economics of sharing is what I call it. People said, "This place looks so cool, I really want to come." How do you invite an invitation? The fourth one is participatory cultures and tools. I think there's a great deal about what makes us as human beings, and because of the period of time that I've got, I can't really sort of go into that, other than the fact that we are actually designed to work collaboratively together. It's the way that we come together and share knowledge and information that actually can really help humanity surge forward. And I think there is not a single industry where we see participatory cultures and tools starting to be deployed that really has amazing effects and impacts and benefits for people. Healthcare is one of the biggest costs of most Western societies, and that cost is increasing. We're getting older. People want us to stay alive for longer. A lot of people are working at that. But of course, it's placing a huge strain on the healthcare system that was designed for a different type of world. And of course, if you go to the doctor, how long are you in there for? Are you in there for a half an hour having a good old chat? Is he really listening to you? Or are you in and out in 5 minutes? You think, well, the doctor spoke and I listened. He didn't really understand my condition. And the problem with chronic healthcare is actually you all have a common problem, but they're all unique to you as you are a tree. So actually diagnosis is a challenge. So Mohammed Ubadili, who set this up, created a platform where actually an entire patient's medical history, if they've got chronic healthcare problems, is available both to the patient and in fact to the clinical team. And through that process, they learn together. This has actually reduced wrong diagnosis, which stands at 15% in hospitals. It reduces overprescription of drugs, and it takes the pressure off of waiting room hospitals simply by designing a healthcare system that allows a doctor or a clinical team and a patient to actually be in open dialogue together. So that is about empowering and saving precious time. Because actually there's a different way of thinking about time and thinking about how you can really deal with the information that would help you really help make that patient's life a very different one. So it's not about social media. It's about deeply understanding about how and why we come together and can share together and transcend together and do extraordinary things together, which is actually not the language of a linear world. That's not the language of management. And in fact, actually, I was asked recently to look at a possible project with a major retailer in the UK, and they said, we've come up with this advertising line called Do More for Less. Well, how would you sell that into the company to make that a kind of operational thing? And I said, well, it all comes down to the fact that this has to be a personal value that each and every person in your organisation has to buy into. And then through a process called participatory leadership, they will start to understand ways in which they can really start to deliver that as an organisational capability. And the response was, sounds like anarchy to me. Right? I didn't get the job, and nor did I want it. So participatory cultures and tools are not about it being faintly sort of folksy and quaint and a few people hanging out on Facebook. There's something really powerful and insightful because it takes us right back to who we were as human beings when we first walked on this planet. The fifth one is craftsmanship. There's some birds in here somewhere for the Birdman. And there's a bit of cooking in here as well. Craftsmanship really speaks to me. I've spent my entire life living a creative life in many ways. And I actually think that we need more craftsmen and craftswomen in this world. If we're going to make a very different type of world, we need you not to be consumers, but we need you to be makers. And the craftsman or craftswoman understands, in fact, that they are always incomplete, but they carry inside them great potential. That they are open to looking at the world in a different type of way. They can see the world in systems. They can start to build patterns that allow them to build very different types of organizations. And they're joyful in wanting to share that knowledge and that information. They're always curious. They're bringing two things together and kind of going, if I put those things together, how does that work? I was watching Maud play the piano here on the stage, and I was watching her as her hands rather dexterously kind of move from side to side like this. And I realized that she'd practiced that many, many times. And we were talking about it briefly before I got on stage, because she said when she plays, and she said it, I'm not thinking about technique anymore. It totally comes from the heart. And creativity, and we're all creative people, believe me, Actually, it's when you practice and when you learn and when you fail and you practice again. And in that moment when you come to make a decision, and it could be about a way of your own personal life or it could be a business decision, but because you've really worked on it, it becomes intuitive. And that's when the best decisions, I think, get made. And so it's the craftsman works with, or her, with their hand, their heart, and their mind. And so when people ask you, if they ever do, well, are you a thinker or a doer? You say, well, I walked into this room with my head on my shoulders, and I couldn't do either if they were separated. So it's a fallacy to think that people think and people do, and there's a separation between the two things. But there's one last thing about craftsmanship that I want to share with you. After mastering nearly all of the martial arts, Aikido founder Morihei Ueshiba felt very unsatisfied, and so he went up into the mountains to spend some time with a Zen master. And after a period of reflection, he came down and he realized that the greatest gift a warrior had was actually to be a giver and a protector of all life. That was his greatest skill. And so the craftsman or craftswoman asked his or herself, is what I create for the collective good? Am I truly creating value here? Or in fact, actually, am I only trying to harvest the cash flow for the quarterly numbers? And we need people to really think about that value. The last one is epic, because the gamer seeks an epic win. And all of the stories in No Straight Lines where actually whether it doesn't matter whether it's at a citywide level, whether it's a startup, or actually whether it's an entire healthcare system that's gone through a profound process of systems change through participatory leadership of all sort transformation. And I think this all relates back to what the human OS wants. And I think we are in a profound period of transition. So our opportunity is that we can transform our world. We can make it more relevant to us as individuals, to be more socially cohesive. We can create organizations which are beautiful to work in and for others to come and engage with. We can create an economy, I think, which is vibrant because we need that vibrancy, but it's mindful of the fact that it must be in service of the greater whole of society. And we have all of that tantalizingly at the ends of our fingertips through the tools, the language, and the processes, I think, which are already out there. But the point is, it comes down to you. It's not really for me on this stage to be a lone warrior in trying to drive that change. It requires every single person in this room and outside this room, outside this country, to be able to take those tools up and make the change that we so desperately need. Thank you very much.
Okay, it's straight to my heart and my brain.
Thank you.
In a straight line. Okay, thank you very much.
We zijn bijna aan